The richest woman in the district stood in front of her own gate, pointed at the food stall that had fed half the street for years, and told the gathering crowd that the mama put's cooking had poisoned her guests. Adeze Nwosu did not lower the lid she was holding. She stood behind her steaming pots and her clean apron, with her late mother's enamel serving spoon in her hand, the same spoon that had served 300 plates at that woman's own party 2 nights before. And she listened to a woman in a purple lace gown and a great deal of gold tell a growing crowd that a poor cook like this one had made decent people sick, and that decent people should know better than to eat from a roadside pot. The market went quiet, the way a Lagos market never goes quiet. The conductor at the bus stop stopped shouting his route. The girl frying akara at the next stall let her oil hiss untended. The same neighbors who for 3 years had eaten from Adese's pots when their own kitchens were cold, who had sent their children to her with 100 naira and trusted her to feed them well, now stood with their mouths open, while a wealthy woman accused her in front of all of them, and Adeze simply set the lid down on the pot, gently, the way her mother had taught her to set down anything that mattered, and waited to be allowed to speak. She had opened the stall that morning, the way she opened it every morning before 6, when the street was still gray, and the Danfo buses were only beginning to fill. A stack of clean plates, a fire she had lit with her own hands, 3 pots of food cooked from her mother's book, and a small tin box with 4,000 naira of float in worn notes, because the woman who owed her 840,000 had not paid, and Adeze had needed to borrow even the float from Mama Caro at the next stall to open it all. Adeze Nwosu was 29 years old. For 3 years, she had run this buka at the busy corner where the market met the bus stop, and for 3 years she had been, in the quiet judgment of the street, the one who did everything the generous, careful, unprofitable way. She did not water down her stew to stretch it. She did not serve yesterday's rice as today's. She gave a full scoop to a hungry laborer who was short 20 naira and told him to bring it tomorrow, and more than once had fed a stranded traveler or a sick old man for nothing at all. The other traders called this softness. They had a name for her at the market, half a joke and half a warning to their own daughters. Mama Charity, they called her, because they said, only a woman with no head for business feeds people who cannot pay. She had not chosen the generous way out of foolishness. She had chosen it because of a woman who was no longer alive to see it. Her mother, Mama Nkechi, had cooked at this same corner for 22 years, on an older set of pots kept cleaner than any hotel kitchen, with this very enamel spoon in her hand, in the same way Adeze held it now, heavy, worn smooth at the handle from a lifetime of one woman's grip. Mama Nkechi had fed market women and bus drivers and school teachers for 22 years and never once sent a soul home sick. And on the last evening she was strong enough to sit up. She had taken the spoon from the pot and the hardback recipe book from the shelf, and she had pressed both into her daughter's hands, and she had said the thing Adeze would carry for the rest of her life. A clean pot has nothing to fear from any mouth, she had said, and an honest hand never has to remember what it cooked, because it cooked the same for everyone. Cook clean, Adeze. That is the whole of it. So Adeze cooked clean. Adeze. She woke before the market stirred, tied her mother's apron over her dress, washed every pot until it shone, and bought the freshest of what the morning offered even when cheaper sat right beside it. And the world had given her, in return, a hard living and a good name. And now a rich woman was trying to take even the name. The rent on her one room climbed every year. Her younger brother was in his final year at the Polytechnic, the first in their family to go so far, and his fees and his books ate everything the buka spared. There was never very much left at the end of a month, only the work and the spoon and her mother's book and the quiet pride of a stall where people knew they would be fed honestly. Until 2 nights ago, that pride had felt like enough. Now she stood accused in front of the whole street of the one thing her mother had spent 22 years never doing. Here is the very thing this channel was built for. So let me say it to you plainly before we go on. If you have ever done the right thing quietly, while louder, richer people cut every corner and were believed over you anyway, if you have ever kept your hands clean and your work honest and watched someone with more money simply decide that your truth did not matter, then you already belong here with us, under the Baobab. Take one moment to subscribe to Baobab Tales, because the honest, overlooked, hard-working people are exactly the ones these stories are told for. And I do not want you to miss what one rich woman's lie was about to do to a days in Wosu, or what a clean pot and a dead mother's book were about to do right back. It had begun, as these things often do, with a long black car at the curb. 2 weeks before the party, a polished saloon had pulled up at the corner where a day's cooked, and a young woman with a sharp bob and a fitted blouse had stepped out, looked at the bouquet the way one looks at an address one is not sure of, and asked whether this was the place people talked about. The mama put whose jollof a certain big madam had tasted at a friend's naming ceremony and could not stop praising. The young woman was Taupe, personal assistant to Chief Mrs. Folasade Ogunbiyi, who was having a party, a big one, 300 guests, the kind the society pages photographed, and the big madam wanted, alongside the small foreign things her planner was arranging. Real food, proper Nigerian food, the kind that made guests talk for a year. Tope said the name Ogunbiyi, the way one says a name expecting it to open doors, and at the corner market it did. Everyone knew the Ogunbiyi compound on the island, the high white walls, the gates that opened on their own. Adaze did not let the name turn her head, but she let it warm her, a little, the way recognition warms anyone who has worked in the dark a long time. She cooked a small pot for them to taste, and 3 days later Chief Mrs. Folasade Ogunbiyi herself came in the long black car, swept out of it in a flowing purple lace gown, and gold at her throat and wrists, tasted one careful spoonful standing up, because she would not sit at a roadside bench, and pronounced it, to Taupe, more than to Adaise, acceptable. Better than acceptable, she allowed, though she said it as though the admission cost her something. They agreed the order at the stall, in the open, with Taupe writing it into her phone, and Mama Caro listening from the next table, the way the whole market always listened. 300 plates, jollof rice, fried rice, the rich beef and chicken stew, peppered goat meat, fried plantain, moin moin wrapped in leaves the old way. For all of it, cooked and delivered and served warm at the compound, 840,000 naira. Half on agreement, half on delivery, the big madam said. The way wealthy people say things they have no intention of remembering exactly. Except the half on agreement never quite came. There was a delay, Taupe explained when Adaise called. Madam would settle everything together after the event, and surely a small businesswoman trusted a woman of Chief Mrs. Ogunbiyi's standing. And Adaise, who had no contract but the word given in front of her own market, did the thing poor honest people do when a powerful person leans on them with a smile. She trusted. She spent her small savings and borrowed the rest from Mama Caro and the meat seller and the rice woman on the strength of 840,000 naira coming after the party, and she bought everything fresh and good. No shortcuts, because it was her name going to the island in those pots. She cooked for 2 days and 1 whole night, In the open kitchen yard, behind her room, under a single bulb, she stirred pots so large she had to stand on a low stool to reach the bottom of them, the sweat running down her back. Her brother home from the Polytechnic, carrying water and washing trays beside her, until the sky went gray again, because 300 plates cooked properly is not a job, it is a war, and Adais fought it the only way she knew, carefully, cleanly, tasting from the enamel spoon and adjusting and tasting again, exactly as her mother had taught her. By the morning of the party, the food was perfect, cooked from the book, every measure, the way it had always been done. And when the hired van came to carry the warming trays to the island, she rode with it herself, in her best ankara and her clean apron, to serve it with her own hands. The compound was a different world. White marquees on green lawn, a band, women in lace that cost more than Adais earned in a year, and men in agbada, stiff with embroidery, and along one whole side, a buffet. And here, for the first time, Adais saw the other food. Beside the spaces left for her warming trays stood silver platters of small pale foreign things, delicate canapes, and little tarts, and pink seafood arranged like jewelry. The work of a separate young caterer, in a plain uniform, setting them out with nervous, hurried hands. Her name was Bisi. Adis learned when the two of them ended up side by side, adjusting their dishes, and Bessie was frightened in the way of someone in over her head. The imported things had come in cold that morning, Bisi confided, and Madame had wanted them out early on the tables for the photographs, hours before the guests would eat. And there was no proper cold storage for so much of it. Under those marquees in the Lagos heat, only ice already melting, and Bisi had said so, and been told, sharply, to do her job, and stop making problems. Adais, who knew exactly what heat does to fish and cream, felt a small cold finger of worry touch her. And then her own trays arrived, and the guests began to come, and the worry was swept away in the work of serving. Her food was the triumph of the night. She watched it happen from behind her warming trays, watched the elegant guests fill their plates with her jollof and come back for more, watched the small foreign things picked at politely and largely left while her pots emptied and emptied. People asked who had cooked it, and some came around the table to tell her themselves. A big man asking for her number for his own next event. For a few hours, Adais Nwosu stood on the green lawn of the Ogunbiyi compound, in her clean apron, and tasted, after 3 years and 22 before them, what it felt like to be seen. She did not know, watching her mother's recipes disappear into 300 grateful mouths, that this triumph was the exact thing about to be turned into a knife. If you've made it this far into Adis's story, hit subscribe, because what happens next is the part I've been waiting to tell you. The first thing that went wrong was the money. Adais called the next morning, polite and patient, to ask when she might come for the 840,000 naira, because she owed all of it onward to Mama Caro and the meat seller and the rice woman who had carried her on trust. Taupe answered, and Taupe was not the same Taupe. Her voice was careful now, rehearsed, the voice of someone passing on a message she did not like. Madame was not well, Taupe said. Several of Madame's guests had taken ill in the night, badly, and Madame was very distressed, and Madame was saying it was the food. Adis stood very still at her stall, with the phone against her ear, and felt the lawn of the compound tilt under her again. 2 days later, and 3 streets away. "The food," she repeated. "Which food?" And Taupe, after a silence, said the words that would empty Adis's life. "The rice and the stew, the mama put food." Madam was saying it was the mama put food that had poisoned her guests. And under the circumstances, Tope said, Madam would obviously not be paying for food that had made people sick, and Adais should be grateful Madam was not taking it further. It was a lie, and a clever one, because it was built on a true thing. People had been sick. That part was real, and the realness of it was what gave the lie its legs. What Chief Mrs. Folasade Ogunbiyi knew, sitting in her cool sitting room, composing her distress, was exactly which food had done it. She knew about the pale foreign delicacies she had insisted on, the seafood and the cream flown in for her image, and set out in the melting heat for the cameras, hours early, against the warnings of the frightened girl she had underpaid to handle them. The big madam did not reach this lie by mistake. She reached it the way frightened, powerful people often do, by looking around for the person least able to fight back and choosing them. A poor mama, put with no contract, no lawyer, no name on the island. Who would the society believe? A woman of the Ogunbiyi standing, or a charity cook from the bus stop? And there was the second thing the lie did for her. It made 840,000 naira disappear. Poisoned food does not get paid for. In one stroke she erased a debt she could easily afford, but could not stand to pay to a woman like that, and dressed it up as the righteous anger of a wronged hostess. The rumor reached the market before Adis did. That is the cruelty of a thing like this. It travels faster than the truth can lace its shoes. By the time she walked to her corner the next morning, the street already had its version, and in it, the big madam from the island had been poisoned by Mama Charity's food. A whole party of important people rushed to hospital, and was it not always the way? The ones who pretend to be so clean. Customers, who had eaten from her pots for years, walked past now with their eyes ahead. A woman who had sent her children to Adis every school day for 2 years crossed to the other side of the road. The laborers who had filled her benches at noon went, instead, to the Akara girl, anywhere but the pot the island said was poison. By the afternoon, Adis stood behind 3 full pots of food, cooked clean that morning out of stubbornness and her last borrowed money, and watched it go cold, with no one to eat it. She gave it away in the end, to the few who would take it, and to the beggars at the bus stop, and went home with an empty tin box and a name in ruins. Things got worse before they got better, because in these matters, they always do. Mama Caro stood by her, fierce and loyal, telling anyone who would listen that she had eaten Adis's food for 10 years, and was standing here healthy as a horse. But loyalty does not pay a debt. The meat seller came, embarrassed, needing his money, and the rice woman after him. And Adisi owed and could not pay, because the 840,000 that should have cleared all of it had been turned into a weapon and used against her. Her landlord, who had heard the rumor too, began to talk about the room. And worst of all, the polytechnic fees for her brother's final year fell due. The last stretch of the long road their mother had dreamed him onto. And there was no money. None. And for the first time, he spoke about dropping out, about coming home to find work so his sister could breathe. And Adis heard in his voice the sound of her mother's whole hope, going quiet, and it was almost more than the rest of it together. That night was the lowest Adis had been since she buried her mother. The room was dark and hot, and the debt sat on her chest like a hand. She took down her mother's enamel spoon and her hardback recipe book, and sat with them on her knees the way she had the night of the funeral. And for the first time in 5 years, she was angry at the woman who had given them to her. Cook clean? What had clean bought? An empty stall, a mountain of debt, a name dragged through her own market, a brother about to leave school, a room she was about to lose. The big madam in her purple lace had served melting fish for a photograph and lied about it to a whole society, and the society believed her, while Adaze, who had cooked 300 plates honestly from this very book, sat in the dark, accused of poison. She pressed her thumb against the cracked spine of the book her mother had filled by hand over 22 years, and she thought, just once, with her whole tired heart, that perhaps her mother had been wrong. And then, because her hands knew the book better than her mind did, her thumb found the back cover, where the end paper had lifted a little at the corner years ago. A loose flap she had felt 100 times. Turning to the last recipe, and never once peeled back. That night, in the dark, with nothing left to lose, she worked her fingernail under it. There was paper inside, folded soft, gone yellow at the creases, slid behind the end paper years and years before, and carried, unknown, through every single day Hades had cooked from that book. She carried it to the small window in the street light, and she unfolded it, and she saw her mother's careful hand, the same hand that had written every measure in the book, and at the top, in that hand, were the words, "For my Daisy." For the day the cooking feels like a losing trade, her mother had known. Of course she had known. A woman does not feed a poor street for 22 years without learning exactly how the world repays an honest pot. And Mama Nkechi had sat down some quiet evening near the end, and written her daughter a letter for precisely this night, and slid it behind the cover of the book she knew her daughter would cook from, and said nothing, and waited, from beyond her own grave, for the day Adaze would need it badly enough to find it. Adaze read it by the streetlight with her hands shaking. "My Adaze," her mother had written, "if you are reading this, then the cooking has cost you something, and you are wondering whether your mother taught you foolishness. So let me tell you the truth I learned at this pot, and never found a way to say to your face. I cooked for 22 years. I watched women who served bad meat grow rich for a season, and women who watered the soup and lied about it keep their stalls, and I buried more than one of them, and I will tell you what I never once saw any of them keep. A name that a whole street would trust with its children. A cook is only as rich as the trust in her pot. They cannot bank it for you, and some days they cannot even see it. But it is the one wealth that is wholly yours, and no rich woman, however she lies, can take it out of a clean pot, because the truth of what you cooked is in the food itself, and the food does not lie even when people do. A clean pot has nothing to fear from an open flame, my daughter. Let them bring their fire. It cannot burn what is already clean. I never had money to leave you. I left you the only thing worth more. Cook clean, not because it pays, because it is who we are, and a woman who knows who she is a woman no one can truly ruin. Your mother," Adaze wept then in a way she had not let herself weep at the funeral, quietly, the book in her lap and her mother's voice reaching her at last across 5 years, on the very night she had needed it, and had been ready, for the first time, to let it go. And when she was done, she folded the letter along its soft creases and slid it back behind the cover where her mother had left it, and she wiped her face, and something in her settled. She would lose the stall before she lost what her mother had left her. She would not crawl to the big madam, and she would not slink away and let the lie stand over her mother's name. She did not yet know how. She only knew that a clean pot has nothing to fear from an open flame, and that there had to be a way to prove it. The way came, as it so often does in these stories, through the very kindness she had been giving away for free all those years. Among the few who never once believed the rumor was an old woman named Dr. Ngozi Eze, who had eaten lunch from Adiza's stall almost every working day for 3 years. Dr. Eze was a retired physician, sharp-eyed and unhurried, silver-gray and dignified in her smart teal blouse, a woman who had run a hospital laboratory for 30 years before she put down her white coat, and who had kept, all her life, a deep and quiet contempt for people who hide their own carelessness behind those weaker than themselves. She had heard the rumor. She had also, unlike the whole island, actually thought about it. And what she thought, professionally, was that it did not add up. She came to find Adiza at the stall on a slow gray afternoon, sat down on the bench nobody else would sit on now, and asked her, plainly, to tell her everything. Not the rumor, the facts. What had she cooked, and how, and what else had been on that table? And Adiza, who had told no one the whole of it, told her about the food cooked fresh from the book, and the trays kept covered and warm. And then, because Dr. Eze kept asking the right small questions, about the frightened girl named Bissy, and the pale foreign things flown in cold and set out for hours, in the marquee heat against the girl's own warning. Dr. Eze listened with her head a little on one side, the way a doctor listens, and when Adiza finished, she was quiet a moment, and then she said the first hopeful words anyone had said in a week. "Seafood and cream," she said, "left warm for hours in this heat, will put a room full of people in the bathroom by midnight every time. Rice and stew kept covered, and hot will not. Your food did not do this, my dear, and I think, if we are careful, we can prove it." Dr. Ngozi Eze did 3 things, quietly, over the better part of 2 weeks, in the unhurried way of a woman who had spent 30 years turning suspicion into proof. The first was that she still knew people. She made some calls, doctor to doctor, to the private clinics on the island where the wealthy take themselves when they are ill, and found, without much difficulty, what the big madam had counted on no one bothering to find, that several of the guests who had fallen sick that night had been seen at the same clinic, which had done what clinics do, and taken samples and run them. The picture the laboratory drew was not vague. It was a pattern of food-borne illness with a short, sharp onset, the kind that comes from a particular family of organisms, the kind that breeds in protein and dairy, left in the warmth, in seafood and soft cheese and cream gone bad in the heat, and not, the report noted almost in passing, the kind associated with a thoroughly cooked and hot-held rice or a simmered stew. To a society lady, this was a page of incomprehensible words. To a retired laboratory physician, it was a confession with the wrong person's name left off it. The second thing Dr. Eze did took patience. She laid the clinic's findings beside Adiza's mother's book and went through every dish that had gone to that party. And there it all was, in Mama Nkechi's hand, every ingredient, every measure, the long simmering, the hot holding. No seafood, no cream, no soft cheese, none of the cold, delicate things in the whole of that book, because Adiza cooked the food of her mother and her market, cooked through and served hot, the way that has fed poor streets safely for generations. The book did not merely defend her, it documented her. Every spoonful she had sent to the island could be traced, written down to an ingredient the laboratory had just cleared. The rich woman had picked, as her scapegoat, the one cook in Lagos who kept a written record of everything she had ever cooked. The third thing was the hardest, and the most human, and it was the one Adiza cared about most. There was the girl, Bissy, the frightened young caterer who had set out the melting platters under orders and been told to keep her mouth shut. Dr. Eze was for leaving her out of it. The report and the book were enough, she said, to clear Adiza in any fair room. But Adais remembered the girl's frightened hands and the way she had said, "I told them," and been ignored. And she understood something about being the small person ordered to carry a powerful person's mistake. She went to find Bisi herself, not to threaten her, to sit with her. She found her jumpy and ashamed in a cramped shared flat, and she did not accuse her of anything. She only told her, gently, the whole of what the lie had cost. The empty stall, and the debts, and the brother about to leave school, and her dead mother's name turned into a word for poison. And she told her she did not blame her, that she knew who gives the orders and who has to carry them, and that she was not asking her to fall on a sword. She was only asking her to tell the truth, once in a room if it came to that. Bisi broke, not from fear, from the thing that had been eating her for 2 weeks, which was that she knew, better than anyone alive, that the roadside food had not done it, because she was the one who had begged for proper cold storage and been refused, the one who had watched the seafood sweat in the sun while the photographer arranged the trays, the one who had been told, in a message she had been too frightened to delete, to keep quiet because Madam would handle it, and it would be blamed on the mama put. She still had the messages. That was the thing. In her panic that night, she had written to the planner, "It is the canapés. The seafood was warm too long. What do we do?" And the answer had come back in cold black letters. "Say nothing. It is the buka food. Madam has decided." Bisi had kept them the way frightened people keep the proof of an order they were ashamed to obey, never meaning to use it, only unable to let it go. And now, sitting across from the woman that order had been used to destroy, she took out her phone with shaking hands and showed Adis the words, and then she said, in a small voice, that she would say it, in a room, to anyone. She was tired, she said, of being the kind of person who keeps quiet. So now there were 3 things, and they fit together like the parts of one truth. The clinic's report, naming the kind of food that had done it. Mama Nkichi's book, proving none of that food had ever been in a Daisy's pots. And the caterer's own messages, in the planner's own words, showing the big madam had not been mistaken, but had chosen the lie, had known the canapés were the cause, and decided, deliberately, to bury her own carelessness in a poor woman's name. The harm had not been done in a court. It had been done in the open, by rumor, in front of a whole market and a whole society, and Dr. Ngozi Eze said it would have to be undone the same way, in public, in a full room, where everyone who had believed the lie could watch it taken apart. The room came sooner than they expected, and it was, fittingly, a room the big madam had built herself. Chief Mrs. Folasade Ogunbi chaired a Society Ladies' Association, a glittering charity circle that met monthly in a hotel hall, and at the next gathering she intended to put the unfortunate poisoning behind her, with a graceful word or two about the dangers of unregulated street food, perhaps a small new initiative, her image polished brighter than before. She did not know that Dr. Ngozi Eze, who had treated half the women in that association over the years, and was respected by all of them, had asked for a few minutes to speak. She did not know that Adais Nwosu was sitting quietly at the back of the hall in her best ankara and her clean apron, her mother's enamel spoon at her waist, and her mother's book in her lap. She did not know, until Dr. Ease rose, that this was not going to be her afternoon at all. Dr. Ease did not raise her voice. The truly powerful do not need to. She stood in that hall of fine lace and gold and said that she had heard, as they all had, that a roadside cook's food had poisoned the guests at a recent celebrated party, and that as a doctor of 40 years, She had found the claim troubling enough to look into properly because a woman's whole livelihood had been destroyed by it. And then, page by page, she laid it out. She read from the clinic report, the real one. In plain words the room could follow, that the illness was the signature of protein and dairy spoiled in heat, of seafood and cream left warm, and not of cooked rice or simmered stew. She held up the Mama Put's recipe book, this cook's record of every dish that went to that party, and showed that there had been no seafood, no cream, nothing of the kind in any of it. All of it cooked through and held hot the safe way street food has been cooked for generations. And then, gently, almost regretfully, she read the messages. The planner's own words, sent the very night of the party. It is the canapes. The seafood was warm too long, and the answer, say nothing. It is the buka food, Madam has decided. The room did not breathe. Dr. Ease laid the papers down and said only one thing more, that the guests had not been poisoned by the poor woman's pot, but by the rich woman's vanity, by delicacies flown in for a photograph and left to spoil in the sun, and that the cheapest thing in that whole expensive party had not been the Mama Put's food, but the decision to blame her for it. And then the old woman sat down. She had not shouted. She had not gloated. She had simply read the truth aloud, line by line, in a room full of the people who had believed the lie, and let it do its own work, and its own work was terrible enough. Adais did not gloat either, because it was not in her, and it had never been the point. She did not fling "I told you so" across the hall at the woman who had tried to ruin her. She sat at the back, with her mother's book in her lap, and her hand at the worn enamel spoon at her waist, and watched a roomful of faces turn, slowly, from the doctor to the big madam. And she let her eyes fill, not with triumph, but with something quieter and older, the feeling of a dead woman's faith in her being proved true in the open at last. Bisi was there too, near the front, having said her small piece in a steady voice. And when at last Adais did stand, all she said, in the calm voice of a woman with nothing left to hide, was that she had cooked that food the way her mother taught her, clean, and that she had only ever wanted her name back. The room, which had laughed at her 2 weeks before without ever seeing her face, gave it back to her then, in a silence that was its own kind of apology. What happened to Chief Mrs. Folasade Ogunbiyi happened the way these things happen to the powerful, not with handcuffs in that hall, but with the slow, total withdrawal of the only thing she had ever truly cared about, her standing. The society that had believed her turned its back completely. The invitations thinned and then stopped. The association quietly found a new chair. The photographers who had loved her found other parties. The story, once it had a clean record victim and a dead mother's book at its center, ran through the city the other way now, and ran fast. 2 of the hospitalized guests, furious to learn the true cause, instructed their lawyers, and the matter the big madam thought she had buried in a poor woman's name became a matter with her own name on every document. She paid Adais in the end, the full 840,000 naira, and a great deal more, besides, on the advice of lawyers who told her it was the cheapest thing she could now do. And she paid it not as a gift, but as a settlement, which is to say she paid it as a woman who had lost. But Adais did not feast on that, because vengeance had never been the hunger in her. The hunger in her had only ever been to cook clean and be allowed to. It did not all come back at once. These things never do. But it came back. The 840,000 cleared the debts, every naira of it. Mama Caro and the meat seller and the rice woman paid in full with thanks. And the settlement on top of it, did the thing Adizi's mother had dreamed of, without ever seeing. It kept her brother in the Polytechnic to the very end, the first in their family to finish, in a gown, with his sister in the front row, in a fresh orange and green ankara, weeping. And the buka came back, slowly, and then all at once, because a street has a long memory for who fed its children honestly, and because the truth, once it was loose, made people ashamed of how quickly they had turned. The benches filled again at noon. The queue came back at dawn, and within the year, the single stall at the corner had become a proper small place with a roof, and a row of pots and 4 young women cooking under a days at the head of it. And the first thing she taught every one of them, before a single recipe, was the thing her mother had taught her: cook clean. She said it the way her mother had said it, plainly, with no sermon attached, and she hung nothing on the wall of her new place but 2 things: her mother's hardback recipe book, on a small shelf where every cook could reach it, and beside it, the heavy, worn enamel spoon, the spoon that had fed half a street and been called poison by a rich woman, and had turned out, in the end, to be the cleanest thing in the whole of that expensive city. One of the young women she hired was Bisi. Adizi sought her out and offered her honest work in an honest kitchen, and Bisi, who had been so frightened of the people above her, grew steady at that corner and stayed. And Dr. Ngozi Ezi still came almost every working day and ate her lunch slowly on the bench that was never empty now. And the 2 women, the retired doctor and the mama put, would sometimes sit together in the late afternoon and not say very much, because the things that mattered between them had already been said in a hotel hall, out loud, where it counted. There was an evening, near the end of that first year, the new place emptied of its cooks, the great city going gold and then violet beyond the open front, when Adiz stayed late alone the way she had stayed late so many nights before, when staying late had bought her nothing at all. She took her mother's book down from its shelf and the enamel spoon from its hook, and sat with them on her lap in the fading light. She ran her thumb along the cracked spine her mother's hands had cracked, and she thought about the night she had nearly decided her mother was wrong, and about how very little, in the end, all of that fear and shame would have been worth set beside what she would have lost if she had crawled to the big madam or slunk away and let the lie stand over her mother's pot. She peeled back the lifted corner of the end paper and read the letter through once more, her mother's hand gone soft at the creases. A clean pot has nothing to fear from an open flame. And then she folded it and slid it back where her mother had left it, and she held the book and the spoon against her. And they were not nothing, and they had never been nothing. So the pot was clean after all, she said, alone, to no one, and to her mother. It was always clean. So here is what I would leave with you tonight, before the light goes. The world will always be quicker to believe a rich woman's word than a poor woman's pot, and quicker to ruin the one who cannot fight back than to ask who is really hiding what. But a clean pot has nothing to fear from an open flame, and the truth of an honest hand has a way of walking out into the daylight on its own 2 feet and standing up in a full room for the person everyone had already condemned. They came to put out her fire, and instead they fed it. So I will ask you this, and I will be reading every answer. If you had been a Dezinuosu, with your name in ruins, and your stall empty, and a powerful person's lie believed by your whole street, would you have stood and cleared your mother's name in the open, the way she did? Or would you have swallowed it and slipped away to start again somewhere? No one knew you, where it was safer to be small. Tell me honestly which of those two women you are, the one who stays and proves the pot was clean, or the one who quietly walks away. And so the fire burns low under the old baobab tree. Stay a while and tell me in the comments where you watched from.